The partnership, which used to be at the heart of EU decision-making, is now set for cooler times too. Francois Hollande, ruling Socialists in France, have attacked the German Chancellor for acting only in her country's interest, they said in a draft document on European policy. Now, although party officials later said those strong words would be removed, the sting reflects growing EU resentment against German austerity. No surprise, I guess, this too. Investment advisor Patrick Young is on the line now to give us some well-informed comment. Hello, evening to you, Patrick. I mean, President Hollande's party allies have since backtracked on this, as I said, but it's left a sour aftertaste. What is the state of German-French relations these days?
Well, the tragedy is that the core backbone of the European Union for so long, Franco-German relations, are plummeting to new lows because, I mean, essentially, you've got Mr. Hollande, who's only been in office for less than a year, but has already become even less popular than actually Charles de Gaulle was when they had to move him to an airport in Germany in 1968 and have the German Air Force guard him against student revolutionaries. That's pretty bad to manage to do that in peacetime in 9 months. He's got a regime that's scarred by the fact that it's got various corrupt individuals amongst them. They've lied about their tax affairs all the time while they've been putting taxes up on everybody else. So therefore, the French are left in a situation where they're desperate to do anything and basically move us back to the 1960s or 70s, let alone the last decade. They want to inflate the economy by spending lots of money that France doesn't have, and they're hoping Germany's going to give them. And Mrs. Merkel says no.
The criticism coincided with statements too by the former French Prime Minister Francois Hollande. He said relations are set to get worse. At the core of this, is it just that Germany wants France to spend money that it hasn't got, or is there more to it?
Oh, I think there's a lot more to it. I mean, one is obviously there is this dynamism of the whole degree of difference of opinion. I mean, Mrs. Merkel is a rather staid, boring German Christian Democrat. She believes in essentially managing your purse strings very clearly, whereas the French Socialists are, like all French governments, and particularly the Socialists, they believe that they should have the right to spend anybody else's money willy-nilly, even their own on occasion when they have it. And ultimately, that's a big clash. But at the same time, there's a problem because actually a fissure is tearing apart the fundamental fabric of the European Union at the moment, and that is between the northern European nations led by Germany, who are seen to be fiscally sound and pragmatic and sensible about their economies, and then you have the rest, all of whom tend to come closer to the Mediterranean. And they're led effectively by France. I mean, France likes to think that it's still a first world economy, but the difficulty is their numbers really aren't dramatically better than some of the failing economies of the Mediterranean, such as, say, Italy or Spain.
Francois Hollande campaigned on pledges to resistance to Merkel's policies. He softened his theme after that, but do you think he's going to bow to pressure and get tough again?
Well, I think the difficulty for Hollande is, I mean, his popularity has plummeted so vastly and so quickly. It's very difficult because, I mean, ultimately the last French presidential election was fought on a juvenile debate discussing how the French government, whoever it was going to be, were going to spend money that they didn't have. And therefore, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's the sort of argument that wouldn't even grace a second-grade students' union in many countries for president of that sort of an institution. It's a disaster. Hollande has said he's going to raise taxes on the rich. He's had to ultimately backtrack on that. He's cracked down on corporations. He's having to crack down on that because ultimately there's a great sucking sound as all of the corporations and indeed the wealthy entrepreneurs leave the country. And therefore, he's left with this position where he has to ultimately try to scapegoat somebody else. And now he's decided it's Mrs. Merkel. Everybody thinks they can attack Germany and get the Germans to open their purse strings.
A final thought. The EC president admitted this week that Europe's drive to slash spending has reached its limit. Do you think Angela Merkel's going to take that on board, or will it make any difference at all?
I don't think it'll make any difference whatsoever, because the problem is that Mr. Barroso is only echoing the words of actually the great Portuguese statesman, their first post-military dictatorship president of the 1970s, who actually said it's time to leave the euro, it's time for Portugal to default, and actually there's a grain of truth in that. So ultimately, Mr. Barroso is trying to keep together incredibly different viewpoints on what the future is, and ultimately the miracle is that the euro has survived this far, but it seems very difficult to actually put a long-term bet in its favour.
Patrick Young, thanks ever so much. Nice to see you tonight.